The sun dipped low over Maple Creek estates, casting a golden hue across the neat rows of houses. It was the kind of neighborhood that looked perfect in brochures, manicured lawns, trimmed hedges, and tidy mailboxes. But behind that perfection were rules, and behind the rules was the HOA patrol. They took their job far too seriously, especially Derek, the young patrol leader who treated the quiet community like his personal racetrack. Grandpa Earl Thompson didn't care much for rules or Derek's smug attitude. A retired farmer, he'd moved in with his daughter's family after his wife passed, bringing along one thing he refused to live without: his vegetable garden. Every morning, he'd be out there in his straw hat, humming old country tunes as he tended his tomatoes, beans, and peppers. It wasn't just a hobby, it was his peace. One Saturday afternoon, the familiar sound of buzzing engines cut through the air. Earl looked up from his watering can to see two HOA patrol bikes roaring down the street. Before he could even shout, they swerved off the road and into his yard, tires kicking up dust and gravel. The first bike tore straight through the garden bed, shredding the tomato vines he'd planted weeks ago. The second clipped the wooden scarecrow, snapping it clean in half. Earl's jaw dropped. He ran out, waving his arms and yelling for them to stop, but the riders just laughed, revved their engines, and sped off down the path that led behind the neighborhood fences. By the time the dust settled, the garden looked like a war zone: broken stakes, crushed vegetables, and ruts carved into the soil. Earl stood there, breathing hard, clutching his hat as rage built in his chest. His daughter, Melissa, came running out of the house, gasping when she saw the destruction. He told her what happened, voice trembling with anger, but she only shook her head and said, "Dad, don't do anything crazy. We'll file a complaint." Earl didn't reply. He stared at the ruined garden, his life's peace trampled under arrogant wheels. Somewhere deep inside, something old and stubborn flickered to life. The patrol had crossed a line. They thought they could ride over his hard work and laugh about it. But Grandpa Earl wasn't the kind of man to let a lesson go unlearned. The next morning, the Thompsons filed a formal complaint with the HOA board. Melissa typed up every detail: time, date, and description of the patrol bikes. She even attached photos of the garden, showing crushed vegetables and torn soil. Grandpa Earl stood beside her as she hit send, his arms crossed and his jaw tight. He wasn't one for paperwork. Back on the farm, when someone wronged you, you dealt with it face to face. But this wasn't that kind of place anymore. Here, the HOA acted like they owned the air everyone breathed. By evening, Derek and his patrol team rolled up again, this time without helmets, acting like nothing happened. Earl stepped onto the porch, his glare sharp as broken glass. "You got something to say about my garden?" he asked. Derek just smirked and kicked the dirt with his boot. "Community patrol has the right to inspect open property areas," he said, voice dripping with arrogance. "Your little patch is right next to the walking trail. You might want to move it before someone gets hurt." Earl's hands clenched at his sides. "That garden's been here since I moved in. You and your boys stay off my land." Derek shrugged, then revved his engine again, letting the tires spit mud before they rode off laughing. Melissa came outside just in time to see her father trembling, not from fear, but fury. Days passed, and the HOA never responded. Not a single apology. Instead, they sent an email reminding residents to maintain community-approved landscaping standards. Neighbors whispered at the mailbox, saying Derek's patrol had become reckless, racing through yards, leaving tire marks, even knocking over a child's bike. Everyone complained, but nothing ever changed. The HOA president, a woman named Cheryl, brushed it off as isolated incidents. That night, Grandpa Earl sat on the porch alone. The garden was quiet, still bearing the scars of what had happened. He lit his pipe, the smoke curling in the cool air, and watched the trail behind his fence. The same trail the patrol used to cut across his yard. He thought of the barbed wire coil he'd kept from his farm days, still rolled up in the shed, waiting for a use. Melissa's words echoed in his mind, "Don't do anything crazy." But as the distant growl of dirt bike engines echoed again in the distance, Earl decided enough was enough. If the HOA wouldn't listen to reason, they'd have to learn the hard way. That night, the moon hung low and pale over Maple Creek Estates. The street was quiet, most porch lights turned off, but in the Thompson backyard, a single bulb glowed from the old shed. Inside, Grandpa Earl rummaged through dusty boxes, pulling out a roll of barbed wire, a pair of pliers, and some wooden stakes. His hands moved with slow, steady precision, the same way he used to mend fences on the farm. Each twist of the wire brought a faint metallic hum, a sound that reminded him of long summers, hard work, and the satisfaction of protecting what was his. Out by the garden, he measured the distance carefully. The patrol bikes always came from the same direction, cutting across the back trail and into his yard at a low angle. So, he set the wire waist-high, stretching it tight between two posts just beneath the top of the small hill they used as a ramp. In the dark, it would be nearly invisible. He tested the tension twice, making sure it was firm but not deadly, just enough to knock sense into whoever thought they could ride over his property again. When he was done, he stood back and nodded. It wasn't pretty, but it would do the job. The following evening, the familiar hum of engines grew louder. Earl, sitting in his rocking chair with the porch light off, leaned forward slightly. He could hear the laughter before he saw them, Derek and his patrol partner, tearing down the trail like it was a racetrack. They didn't slow down as they reached the garden. Derek shouted something over the roar of the engine, and then it happened. A sharp metallic twang split the air. The lead bike hit the wire with full force, the front wheel catching before flipping forward. The rider tumbled through the dirt, his helmet bouncing off the ground. The second rider swerved hard, lost control, and crashed into the fence, the engine sputtering out. For a moment, there was only the sound of groaning and broken branches. Earl stood up, walked slowly to the edge of the porch, and called out, "Private property means stay out." His voice was calm, cold, and certain. The two patrolmen scrambled to their feet, limping and cursing, realizing they'd messed with the wrong man. Earl didn't chase them, he didn't need to. The message had been delivered loud and clear. By sunrise, the story had already spread through Maple Creek Estates. 2 HOA patrol riders had been injured while inspecting a property. Derek's dirt bike lay wrecked against the Thompson fence, and rumor had it the men had spent half the night explaining themselves to the police. Melissa woke up to angry knocking at the front door. When she opened it, 3 HOA board members stood on the porch, led by Cheryl, the president, her face tight with fury. "We need to speak with your father immediately," she demanded. Grandpa Earl came out calmly, wiping his hands on a rag. Cheryl started firing accusations: reckless endangerment, intentional harm, violation of HOA safety codes. Earl didn't flinch. Instead, he motioned toward the small security camera mounted under the porch roof. "You might want to see the footage before you start talking nonsense," he said, and handed her a flash drive. Later that afternoon, a police cruiser pulled up. Officer Daniels, a fair-minded local cop who'd known Earl from his farm days, stepped out. He'd already reviewed the footage. It showed everything: Derek and his patrol tearing through private property, laughing as they trampled the garden, and finally, the crash when they ignored the no trespassing signs. Daniels called it what it was: trespassing and property damage. The barbed wire, he said, was a reasonable deterrent on private land. The HOA board had no defense. Word spread fast. Derek was suspended, and the HOA faced fines for unauthorized patrol activity. Neighbors who had stayed silent before now came over to shake Earl's hand. "About time someone stood up to them," old Mr. Jensen from across the street said. Melissa finally allowed herself to smile, though she scolded her father half-heartedly for taking matters into his own hands. Over the next few weeks, the garden began to heal. Earl replanted his tomatoes and replaced the scarecrow with a new one, sturdier and wearing Derek's old patrol vest that had been left behind during the chaos. On a small wooden sign, he painted the words,